Thank you for coming in. Senate District 11 is what you represent. Have for, is it 8 years now? 10 years now?
10 years.
10 years now. So why don't you just start out by talking about maybe why you want to keep going and why you want to stay in the position?
Well, I've been really, honored and humbled and proud to serve for these last 10 years. And I think we've done some really good work, but the work isn't done. There's still a great deal of difficult work ahead of us. I think that I've developed a really good working relationship with all of my colleagues in the legislature, particularly the Senate. The House is a little harder to track with all their members, but I work hard with my 67 members in the Senate, regardless of party affiliation, truthfully. I chair Health and Human Services, a really difficult job, and really work to respect all of the voices on our committee. And when I roll out bills to take into conference, every single time there's something really meaningful from every single member of our committee, and we always have a bipartisan vote on that bill and carry it in, and I bring folks in to work with me. It's an approach that Minnesota has a pretty long history with, sort of including all stakeholders. It's one I've developed a lot of skills in delivering, and I would like to continue to do so.
Yeah, we've talked about that in the past, your ability to reach across the aisle, or your willingness
Absolutely.
to reach across the aisle, and then interactions. Talk a little bit, what are some of your prouder accomplishments, some of the bills you've gotten through that?
Well, actually, the Duluth News-Tribune here was the first to break state liens this year. John Lundy came down and talked to a couple of my constituents. Luckily, I caught wind of it before it was published, and I was able to call and say, "Hey, look, I've actually talked to a few people, and this has been a sort of late-breaking thing, but I do have a solution for it and have drafted it." And so removing estate recoveries from Medicaid recipients that are receiving just basic health care services, just the ability to go see your doctor, the state, and truthfully, most expansion states in the country should be doing this. I think we were the second one to do so, but we removed those estate liens as a barrier to healthcare access for some 60,000 Minnesota families, and it was a great deal of work, and truthfully it required that bipartisan effort. Truthfully, I like I said, I had the bill drafted. I had done some work on it before getting into session, and I had many individuals from the House that are politically affiliated with me, begging to carry that bill. It was, it was going to be a good bill, but I kept saying, no, just hold off. I need actually to get my counterpart, Representative Dean, who I have a really good working relationship with. We have a different view of the world, but we need to work together in this era of divided government. And so I held off for about 6 weeks of a 10-week session, and never played politics with it. Continued to talk to him about the policy behind it and working with it, and share credit with him. I mean, he did step forward. He dropped the bill himself. He authored it, and we were able to get that across the finish line. It did.
It got signed by the governor.
It did. It got signed by the governor.
This session.
Yeah, it was. That was actually a really big piece of work, and it was really an unfair, unintended consequence. And so, that was. It's really good when you're able to deliver something like that. Working with some of our school districts, some of the disaster recovery that we did 4 years ago, and then another round of it yet this summer was some.
You mean after the flooding?
After the flooding, with Moose Lake and Willow River, and
right.
Being able to make sure that the state was there to help our communities rebuild. Getting out and working with our communities and understanding what they went through. And no offense, but I still have a hard time. Everybody calls it the Duluth flood. I'm like, wait a minute, Duluth, yeah, Duluth got a lot of attention. Duluth was a real infrastructure disaster, but if you want to go into the homes, 1,000 homes in my district were flooded. And certainly some homes as well as infrastructure in Duluth, but they were kind of different problems, and the state is really good at rebuilding infrastructure in a natural disaster, but it takes a real lift to get these individual homeowners together and really make a difference. And one of the things that we got out of that too, that is coming, that's helped in a lot of the events this summer, is going through that experience. We learned that natural disasters, extreme weather events are not a thing of the past. We're going to be seeing more of them, and we needed to recognize that. And what we had to go through 4 years ago was come into a special session, have a debate about it, and set aside the money, and realizing that we're only in session up to 5 months a year. Not including the summer when a lot of the severe weather events occur. We really should put together a framework to handle these, without us having to come back to a special session every year. So we put together a framework for, a threshold of event. If there's an absolutely over-the-top natural disaster and it's going to exceed a fairly significant threshold, then we need to come back and weigh the budget ramifications. But we set aside a good pool of money that has been able to accommodate the natural disasters that we are seeing and are just continuing to see. There's counties, still trying to put together their estimates from the last round of flooding.
And there's criteria now then, if I'm hearing you right,
Yep.
that has to be met before state steps in?
Well, there always will be criteria before the state steps in, but what we set in place was a set of criteria where the state doesn't have to have a special session. It doesn't have to bring the legislature back to make the state assistance available to communities that are struggling. Because that's a big lift to get the legislature back together, and it's a big expense as well. And we were able to set up a framework and say, hey, look, the bottom line is, when our communities are faced with a natural disaster, no fault of their own, the state is going to be there. We should actually set up this framework ahead of time and have it so that it can flow without this additional special session. And that has worked incredibly well. I'm pretty proud of working through the experience that we had, and setting up that framework has really helped a lot of communities. We're getting a lot of incredibly positive feedback when we went through the flooding again this summer. The public officials I talked to said yes. It's a world of difference working with the state this time around through some of the frameworks that we set up.
You mentioned your liens legislation you got through this last session, but of course there's a lot that didn't get through the last session. Bonding bill, tax bill, transportation bill, on and on and on. As someone who has made it a commitment, who's committed to reaching across the aisle, working together with the other side, what could have happened differently this year?
Each of those are really difficult issues. So yes, we didn't get a tax bill, we didn't get a bonding bill, we didn't get a transportation bill. Transportation is one of those ones, I guess I'm going to quote Governor Dayton. He says, there is absolute unanimity around the state. Everybody knows we have to fund our roads. And there's also unanimity that nobody wants to pay for it.
That's right.
And that's one of the struggles. And, with transportation, and this one is not really a partisan issue so much as a regional issue. And when regions try to fight for just their needs, you cannot put together a majority to pass a bill. There are really, broadly speaking, three very distinct transportation needs. There's an inner city transportation need that is very different from a suburban transportation need, both of which are very different from a greater Minnesota transportation need. And all three of them, you need to have a package that can recognize that we are one Minnesota and that we need to support our transportation infrastructure in each of the three regions, or they're just, the fact of the matter is there isn't a path to a majority in the House and a majority in the Senate sending a bill to the governor. I think that, I personally think that the state is long overdue for an infusion of additional resources outside of the general fund to support our transportation infrastructure. I mean, I unabashedly say, I'm a little ashamed of where we're at right now. If we look back at our predecessors in office, we inherited a transportation system 95% built out and debt-free. I mean, we inherited this system that we were able to use to build one of the strongest economies in the world. And we didn't even have the foresight to maintain that infrastructure that we inherited, let alone build out the infrastructure that's going to be needed for our kids and our grandkids as we move forward. Bonding is another one where, bonding actually requires a supermajority vote.
Before you move to bonding,
Yeah.
real quickly, what would you support as a source of funding for transportation needs?
I'm okay with an additional gas tax. I've voted for it before. In 2008 was the last time we had a major infusion of capital. That said, I recognize that the gas tax actually is a little bit outdated at this point. I mean, there are, cars that get much greater mileage that still use our highways, and kind of escape some of there's hybrid cars that don't use gas at all, and we're missing a segment that is a growth segment of the auto industry, and it's time we should update that somehow and try to figure out some new modes. They're tricky to get at though, but I'm open to the conversation. If it's not the time to roll out a brand new type, I could also support just a straight up gas tax. I mean, it does provide the necessary support for our road and bridge infrastructure. I mean, it is a well accepted fact, again, bipartisan, nobody disputes that we are 600 million per year shy of being able to support our current infrastructure. $6 billion over 10 years. That's a major gap. I mean, our roads are going to continue to deteriorate until we start trying to recognize that we need to support that infrastructure.
But the other sources, you mean, are you talking like the miles driven tax or some sort of?
Yeah, some sort of updating it to make sure that it captures the true use, portfolio across the state.
Yeah.
I'm open to something like that. I don't have that magic wand in my pocket either, but I know there's a lot of really smart transportation people. Nobody's really solved that one in a great way just yet.
Right.
But I'm open to that conversation, barring finding something, then, an additional gas tax is acceptable as well.
Okay. Going back then to the bonding bill and maybe what could have happened differently for success this past session?
Well, we could have had a much more open debate. I hate to fall to pointing fingers, but truthfully, the conversation in the House was consistently behind closed doors. We had open votes and, a long, sometimes difficult process in the Senate, which is the history, trying to roll this out. It takes a supermajority, 3/5 vote to pass a bonding bill. That's really difficult to deliver as well. At the end of the session, we did have a bill. It was really frustrating that was sent over from the House that literally nobody had ever seen. I mean, I had never seen the spreadsheet. I had never seen any language. There is 30 minutes left of session. And I mean, the information isn't even there on my computer. I can't do it. I can't get in to see if WLSSD or any of the Duluth projects had the language or the money. I mean, we were all in the dark. And yet, even in that environment, I still voted for that bill because I knew that in a half hour, when we swing that gavel, sine die, it's a really tricky thing to get back. And if we don't pass a bonding bill, that was about $1 billion bonding bill that had some really important projects around the state. And if we don't pass a bonding bill in the second year of a biennium, we fall that $1 billion behind in maintaining our infrastructure. So I was very frustrated, and I had, working with, no real information. I mean, a spreadsheet that was one-page single-sided on a major bill is really an unacceptable way to proceed. And I think that, one of the tricks, again, and this is just sort of some of the core facts, that supermajority is really, really hard to get. And the House staked out a position where they were going to have this $800 million bonding bill. And, you're not going to get to a supermajority with $800 million. It's too skinny. People, members need to, feel like it's actually taking care of the infrastructure in the entire state. And so they never were able to roll out what that bill looked like. They kept saying that it existed, but they never produced it. And so at the end, then this was their compromise that they just threw a Hail Mary over, and it failed.
What in your district was in the bonding bill and now is going unfunded, and what's going to happen as a result, if you know?
Well, I mean, actually, it wasn't even about my district, truthfully. I mean, I had, there were some really important security upgrades at the Moose Lake Prison. Certainly I have 2 MNSCU sites in my district, both Fond du Lac Travel Community College and Pine Technical and Community College, and they had some, HEAPR money in there to maintain infrastructure and things like that. But it wasn't a really heavy on my district. I mean, truthfully, some of the WLSSD things that I've worked hard to try to save were in there, and those roll out.
Our steam plant.
Yeah, WLSSD serves a much broader region, so that was one of the reasons they came to me and asked if I'd help champion that, and I did. And,
Let's switch gears a little bit.
Yep.
You're on Health and Human Services. You just said let's talk about MNsure, what needs to happen next. Of course, there's some people talking about doing away with it completely and starting over. Where are things at? Or where should things be going next?
Yeah, with implementation of the Affordable Care Act, let me just start with, this has been a really difficult process, and it's unfortunate that Minnesota has a long history of, certainly we have our disagreements and whatnot, but we have a long history of really having a collaborative approach to healthcare, and it has served us well. We have consistently the healthiest or the second healthiest state in the country. We go back and forth with Hawaii and sometimes Massachusetts and whatnot, but a really healthy community because of our willingness to invest in the health of our people and our communities. It's something I'm very proud of. Unfortunately, the Affordable Care Act really, at the federal level, became hyper-partisan. I mean, to the extent rarely seen. It was a complete divide, and yet it was the law of the land. And I needed to recognize that, and so I stepped in and I did the very best I could to roll out a Minnesota implementation of the Affordable Care Act that included the Medicaid expansion, which saved over $1 billion to our budget over a 5-year window, and it's actually exceeding that amount. That was the forecast amount. It's reduced our uninsured rate by more than half to about 4.3. The tricky part right now is it has triggered some extreme volatility within the individual market. One of the things that I really need to stress is this is a really important market segment. The turbulence and the volatility there is something I take seriously, and that we really do need to work on. The individuals paying these rates are really struggling in many instances, though the ACA did recognize that was going to be the case, and for over half of the individual market, there is federal subsidies to buy down the monthly cost of the health insurance. But the broader point is this individual market is 5% of the marketplace of where people gain access to health care. And truthfully, the reforms in the other 95% of the market have actually been producing some not insignificant advances. The employer-sponsored insurance, large employers have seen the smallest increases in their health care costs. They are still increasing, but the smallest increases since these reforms in over 50 years. We're starting to actually bend that cost curve a little bit. Small group has rate increases at or below CPI for the first time in a very long time. Public programs, we've added over 250,000 people to our public programs at a lower absolute dollar spend at the state level than before we added these individuals. We're through some really smart procurement rules and some really smart rules to try to help get our payment systems out of the way of the proper care model for individuals, trying to get towards that multidisciplinary team approach to healthcare with the patient at the center of that team, and allowing our healthcare system that knows really what needs to happen to deliver that care in a much more person-centered way. That's what we're trying to do with our public programs, and we're seeing some great work in that avenue as well. And we need to take a look at producing stability to the individual market. There's 270,000 people in that market that we really need to pay attention to. And if we can get past the politics of it and really talk about how we can find solutions, there are solutions to actually stabilize this marketplace and make sure that people have access to affordable, quality health care. And there's many options on the table as far as I'm concerned, and we need to have that conversation. Hopefully, after things settle down after November 8th, honestly, right in this window up till November 8th, we're not going to take the partisanship out of it. Right. It's unfortunate. We're going to have to ride through that, but whoever the partners are, I'm going to get to work right away, start talking about ideas, real ideas, and hopefully we can focus on ideas that can actually bring that stability and to that marketplace that really needs some help.
What would be your maybe top 2 priorities in St. Paul?
Well, probably fixing the mental health system, starting to really work on that.
That's gigantic.
That is gigantic. It's a big, intractable problem. I spent, 8 hours in Cambridge yesterday. I'm on the governor's mental health task force. We spend a great deal of time and have really good conversations about what it is, and it's tricky. It's there's push and pull everywhere you go to try to work on this. And we were in Duluth. I don't know, 3 weeks ago or something like that, and really, we had the Commissioner of Human Services and I had the opportunity to have dinner with some of the leadership team at Essentia and talking about some of the really great Duluth initiatives that you have to work on both mental health and chemical dependency, to tell you the truth. You guys have...
They're tied together.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Co-occurring is, you can't, truly, I kind of in just to say, these are the redheaded stepchildren of the healthcare system, mental health and substance abuse, chemical dependency. The healthcare system wants to operate without really trying to incorporate those. Not individuals in the healthcare system do realize this, but it's just different funding streams for these two. And I'm like, redheaded stepchildren need to unite and get together, and work to be a much more central part of serving that whole person within the healthcare system. And Essentia's really been working hard on it, and it's a broad community dialogue up here that includes, law enforcement that all too often is the entry point to our mental health system today. Honestly, there's something very, very wrong when, red lights and sirens are, your entry point to our mental health system. That's not the way to approach healing, or the emergency rooms, right. And we learned some really good things in Duluth. It's kind of changed my thinking, actually.
maybe one or two things that St. Paul can do to help boost the economy here in northeastern Minnesota? Very open-ended question there.
Yeah. You know, one of the things we did, we did transportation and bonding. We didn't do taxes. Let's go back to our tax bill,
Yeah,
truthfully. One of the other, things left undone, and that was a really good bill for rural Minnesota. We had, we had elimination of the first $100,000 of businesses' commercial industrial tax. So, for small businesses out in greater Minnesota that have really been having a hard time with the commercial industrial tax, that first $100,000 of value is excluded from the tax and removed from the whole levy, so it's not shifted to larger entities as well. That was a really significant tax proposal. It also included mechanisms to try to reduce student debt load, which really that's a statewide issue, but particularly onerous for some of the folks that come from very modest means out here. We had farm is about 20%, a little better than of the state's economic drivers. Comes from the agricultural industry, and as we try to do our education, we've long realized that operating our schools the levy has been placed on house, garage, 1 acre, but for building levies, the entire farm property is assessed. And so in farm communities, it's been nearly impossible to get levies to keep our infrastructure up for the schools that need to teach our kids. And we took 40% of the agricultural property assessment off in that tax bill. That is really a huge benefit to greater Minnesota trying to rebuild our economy. That tax bill and talking about some of the other issues within it, the investments in local government aid and county program aid were absolutely critical to trying to help prevent the counties from having to hit the property tax system too hard. They don't really have many other tools,
right.
So
LGA was in the tax bill.
absolutely,
right?
yeah, $20 million
Yeah.
of LGA lost in that tax bill as well. And truthfully, greater Minnesota does really well when we have a statewide system of tax collections and then distribute it to, again, recognize that we're one Minnesota. We do really well in that environment. When we significantly degrade our state taxes and push more out to the locals,
Yeah.
greater Minnesota really doesn't fare well in that.
Very quickly, can the tax bill be resurrected in this coming session, maybe in the early days, or will it start all over?
That's a very good question. It's one that I would advocate that we tried to get that passed in the first days of session. That can prove trickier than one might think.
Okay.
Once you get into St. Paul, I'll be there to try to vote for it if we can put it up, fixing that $100 million error. That was a real error, and it would have cost us $100 million. I think the governor was right in vetoing that tax bill, unfortunately.
Yeah. We have just about 1 minute left.
Sure.
Senator Lourey, why should voters in District 11 return you to St. Paul this fall?
Well, I've done what I've told the voters I would do. I do my very best. I dedicate myself to listening to all voices and trying to find that path to getting bills accomplished that can really help Minnesota. And I'm a local farm kid, grew up in the area, continue to run a farm. Proud of my wife who teaches school, and my kids are grown up now and gone, but they're doing great things. And I'm sort of really embedded in our local communities, have been my whole life. And I honestly believe that I do a good job representing our communities, and humbly ask constituents to agree and continue to support me.
Very good. Best of luck to you, sir.
All right.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you.